Welcome to the Darkest Dungeon mod spotlight, where I will showcase a modded hero and explain their mechanics. Today we will be taking a look at the Prodigy, created by Exaelus. The Prodigy is part of an ancient guild of holy warriors, seeking to protect the world from evil. Channeling divine power through his body, he combats monsters with his bare hands and unbreakable will. Prodigy is a flexible damage dealer who moves around your party to use different attacks. He also boasts bonus damage versus a wide variety of enemy types, as well as a few stuns and debuffs to provide utility. The Prodigy has a pretty good stat line. His dodge is above average, his speed is pretty good, his crit is above average, his stun resistance is really good, his disease resistance is Plague Doctor levels, his debuff resistance is really high, and his trap disarm is at an acceptable level to disarm traps. Whereas his health is maybe 10% below the average, and his move resistance is quite below the average, but that isn't that big of a deal since the Prodigy can do attacks from any position of the party, as we'll go over. Everything else, like his damage, his blight, and bleed resistance, are all average. Now, the Prodigy's first skill is his most important one, that is Spirit Shift. The Prodigy is a modal fighter. He switches between an offensive mode and a defensive mode. In the defensive mode, he has access to these first three skills, and in offensive mode, he has access to these three skills. In defensive mode, each of these attacks move him back one position, and he can use them from anywhere in the front three positions of the party. And his offensive moves can only be used from a single position each, position 2, 3, and 4, and they always move him to the front of the party. So in this way, you would use your defensive moves to position the Prodigy where you want him in your party, and then use the appropriate offensive skill to charge back to the front and deliver a powerful strike. Additionally, Spirit Shift has a number of bonuses as you switch between them. You start every battle in defensive mode, but of course you can easily switch to offensive mode on the first turn if you'd like. Using Spirit Shift does not take your turn, and you can still do one of your attacks. You can only shift once per turn though. So when you switch from defensive to offense, you have a 40% to 30%, the chance goes down, of 2 to 6 stress healed on the Prodigy. Additionally, he buffs his damage by 15 to 35% for one attack, as well as 1 to 5% crit for just one attack. He debuffs his speed by 1 to 3, and his dodge by 4 to 12 for one turn. When he switches from offensive to defensive, he also has the same 40 to 30% chance of healing 2 to 6 stress. He debuffs his damage by 15 to 35% for one attack, as well as his crit by 1 to 5% for one attack. Additionally, on all of his defensive moves, whenever he makes a defensive attack, he buffs his speed by 1 to 3, and his dodge by 4 to 12 for one turn. So when you're playing defensively, you also get a little extra protection, and you act sooner. It's not a huge buff, but it helps. And when you're in offensive mode, all of your attacks clear the guard on the Prodigy, so he can't be protected by a man-at-arms or anything like that. And it gives the entire party 5 to 15% stress resistance for 2 turns. So when you're being offensive, this invigorates your party and helps keep them calm in the face of the horrible things they're seeing in the dungeon. Now, let's look at the Prodigy's defensive skills. His first one is Paralyzing Palm. It is his most flexible defensive skill because it can hit any of the front 3 enemy positions. It has a minus 15% damage modifier, ignores any guard on the enemy team, so you can hit those pelagic groupers being guarded by pelagic guardians, for example. It has knockback 1 attached to it. It does 15 to 35% bonus damage versus humans, and it dodges their debuffs their dodge by 20 to 30 and 2 to 6 speed for 3 turns. It's especially good against humans, but if you're just trying to get some extra hits against row 3, this isn't too bad, though one of his other defensive moves does a little bit more damage in general. The Prodigy's second defensive attack is Hollowed Kick. This is used against both of the front 2 positions of the enemy team, with a minus 30% damage modifier. It pushes them back 2, though of course one or both could resist it, and you might push only one of them back. It can create some interesting effects, to say the least. And it has a bonus 15 to 35% bonus damage versus beasts. So against beasts, this can be pretty good. You can kill the rabid undead dogs. Well, they're not undead, but they're beasts. Much more efficiently, even though it has that 30% damage penalty. Otherwise, it's just a solid move if you're finishing off one damaged enemy in the front and get a little damage on another. If you want to put movement skill chance trinkets on him, then you can use this to really screw up the enemy positioning. But otherwise, it's okay.
Confidence surges as the enemy crumbles.
The Prodigy's third defensive skill is Righteous Fist. This can only hit the front position, so it's a bit limited, but it has the best damage modifier out of his defensive attacks, with minus 10 at rank 1 up to a bonus 10% damage at max rank. It also has a fairly high crit modifier, so you can get a pretty decent hit despite the fact that defensive mode damage isn't that great. It ignores stealth, so this can be relevant for some of the Shieldbreaker DLC and the new stealth enemies. If they end up in the front row, you can hit them anyway, though it won't reveal them. It will also push the enemy back 3. So sometimes you can whack that enemy in the front and send them all the way to the back, and it's just like, bye, see you forever. Additionally, it marks the target for 3 turns, which is nice if you have, the usual bounty hunter, arbalist, or even just the Prodigy himself can use one of his other moves to do bonus damage versus marked. Now, let's take a look at the Prodigy's offensive skills, the first of which is Heavenly Charge. The Prodigy must be in position 2 to use this, and can hit the front 3 positions of the enemy team, all of them. This has fairly low accuracy, but it is an area of effect attack with 70 to 90 accuracy and a minus 66% damage modifier, though it also has a 15 to 35% bonus to damage versus undead. Then it debuffs their damage by 10 to 30% and their crit by 2 to 10% for 3 turns. This can be one option for an opener to a fight if you want to cut back on the amount of damage the enemy does, though when choosing what offensive skill you want to use, you have to pick before you really know what your enemy team is going to be, or what the enemies are going to be, because if he's not in the right position, then you have to spend that time to get him where you need him to be. Because if you want to use Heavenly Charge, he has to be in the second position. That said, the big debuff to damage and crit isn't too bad. I would really like that against, say, a group of Prodigy groupers, and they just do tons of damage and crit you, and this just gets rid of that nonsense right away. His next skill is Sacred Strike. He can only use this from position 3, and it hits both the first and second position of the enemy team for minus 33% damage, with a 15 to 35% bonus versus Eldritch. Additionally, it has a low chance to stun. It starts at 80% and gets 10% per level. But if you want to invest stun chance trinkets on him, it can be a good way to stun both of the front enemies right away using his high speed.
A brilliant confluence of skill and purpose.
The Prodigy's final skill is Divine Haymaker. You can only use this from the back position of the party, and it only hits the front position of the enemy party. As a trade-off to this strict limitation, it does have very high accuracy and very high damage, with 10 to 50% bonus to damage, 8 to 10% bonus to crit. It is armor piercing, so even though the enemies in the front row are typically the enemies with the most health and high protection, Divine Haymaker doesn't give a crap and is going to destroy him anyway. It has a 30 to 50% bonus damage versus marked targets, so you can lead up with Righteous Fist to move him to the back position, and then use Divine Haymaker to get tons of damage. And it stuns the enemy with an average skill chance. So it can be a pretty decent way to put out a ton of damage and control the enemy. It's just that you have to get him to the back row, and that's going to take several turns of using defensive skills or having other party members who can move forward in the party, which would shuffle the Prodigy back. How you do it is up to you, but a lot of times I find myself using Sacred Strike or Heavenly Charge, depending on how many defensive moves I want to use first. Next, let's go through the Prodigy's camping skills. He has Fortune Cookie, which I think is a pretty fun camping skill. For 3 time points, he has a 25% chance each to get a number of nice bonuses. He could get 5% crit, 10 accuracy, 10 dodge, 10% protection, 3 speed, or prevent nighttime ambush. All of the buffs last for 4 battles. So this could be amazing. You could get all of the buffs, and he'll just be godlike for 4 battles. Or maybe you'll just get like one of them. If you're really unlucky, you won't get anything. But typically you'll get, 1 or 2, maybe 3, something like that. In that range, just something reasonable. If you don't have any other, or even if you do have another method of preventing nighttime ambush, it's a good idea to use this first, just in case you do prevent nighttime ambush. Then you don't have to waste the time points on someone else to prevent nighttime ambush. His next camping skill is Gem Stash. For 2 time points, he gives you a random gem. You can use this up to 3 times. Each time it gives you a gem as if it had dropped from a chest with the same probabilities. So you're most likely going to get a citrine or a jade. But if you're lucky, you can get up to, a ruby or a sapphire. You can't get puzzling trapezohedrons. Sorry, dream shattered. His next camping skill is Serenity. For 5 time points, he loses a massive 50 stress from himself, reduces the amount of stress he gains by 25% for 4 battles, and lowers his damage by 25% for 4 battles. Of course, you can use herbs to remove that damage penalty if you wish. Additionally, all companions have a 50% chance to lose 50 stress of their own, and a 50% chance to gain 25% stress resistance for 4 battles. It's really expensive, but it does have the potential to remove a lot of stress from your entire party. Even if the Prodigy is the only one who has a lot of stress, this can be a decent way to remove it. 50 stress is a lot. And his last camping skill is Solemn Training. For 4 time points, you reduce the chance that your party gets surprised and increase the chance that you surprise enemies by 15% in both directions. Additionally, all companions other than the Prodigy gain 15 accuracy and 15 dodge for 4 battles. This is a solid party buff, though again sadly the Prodigy doesn't benefit from it. And the additional chance to surprise monsters can help give you a little extra edge to take out dangerous enemies before they can act. Some other interesting facts about the Prodigy. He is in fact religious. As I said, he is a holy warrior. So as a consequence, he cannot work with the Revenant class, another Exaelus mod, or the Abomination. Sorry, friend, you're just going to have to work with some other guys. Stick with the Occultist and the Jester. The Prodigy benefits from the House of the Yellow Hand district if you have the Crimson Court DLC. And when you take him on missions, he gives you 1 holy water as provisions. Now, how I like to use the Prodigy, typically I'll start him in position 3 and lead with Sacred Strike most of the time. It's great against Eldritch, and I do like running in the Cove, so obviously this is useful in that regard for that bonus damage. And you get that stun chance. If you want to dedicate a stun amulet on him, you can have a pretty decent chance of just taking 2 enemies out of the fight before they ever get a chance to do anything. Divine Haymaker is nice if you find yourself in the back position, but usually I'll just use whatever defensive skill seems appropriate or does the most damage. A lot of times they don't seem that different to me. I don't really care all that much which one I'm using. I just kind of select through each of them and see whatever's going to do the most. But, if they're beasts, then Hollow Kick might be better. If they're human, then Paralyzing Palm can be pretty good. Paralyzing Palm is also pretty good against bosses because you can get the nice debuff on them. Heavenly Charge I don't find myself using a whole lot. because of the low damage it does, but that debuff is pretty nice, so I don't know, maybe it suits you better. In conclusion, the Prodigy is a solid damage dealer who can be the cornerstone of a shuffling party. His flexibility means he can work well against enemies that are likely to move you around, like Shamblers, and his wide array of damage bonuses means he can always find a way to get an advantage over his enemies, if you are smart about it. For a character that moves around as much as he does, I think he is very easy to learn to use, and he is a lot of fun too. I think you should have no problem slotting him into a variety of teams. Finish him!
Annihilated.
Fatality.